So good morning, everybody, and welcome to Managing Stress and Anxiety during COVID-19 workshop. So hello from the sunny Singapore. So both Sunita and myself, we're both based in Singapore. And thank you everybody for joining us from, of course, Singapore, Hong Kong, UK, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines. So some housekeeping rules. So this session will be recorded and we will send you all a replay later. And please make sure you remain muted and your camera is off throughout the entire session, so the spotlight will be on the speaker. So today our workshop will be very engaging, and Sunita actually will be doing several mindfulness exercises with us as well. So please participate, as it will help you understand yourself and your emotions better and help everybody who's in this workshop as well. So also, please ask Sunita any questions on the chat box anytime during the entire workshop. So hello, everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Sabrina Ho. I'm the founder and CEO of Half the Sky, a career platform for diverse talent. So today is my great pleasure to have Sunita to run this workshop with us. So a quick introduction. Sunita is currently the co-founder of Project Renaissance, a strategic consultant, coaching, and training companies. She has worked with governments and global organizations like Oracle, Credit Suisse, Rolls-Royce, and Walt Disney to enhance their people's performance, innovation, EQ skills, and resilience. She's also a behavioral scientist and social psychologist, as well as a certified deception detection analyst who specializes in emotional intelligence. So you can ask her what deception detection analyst is during the Q&A. So welcome, Sunita, and I will give the floor to you and make you a host.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sabrina.
Okay. All right. Sunita, now you're the host.
Great. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Very good morning to you. I hope that you've all had a great night's rest. If not, don't worry. My goal is for you to feel a lot better after this. Now, before we start, can I invite all of you to just do a big stretch in your chair? Just stretch and relax yourself and take a deep breath and go, ah. And hopefully that has prepared you for a journey that I'm going to bring you through today. And that is on how we can better manage our stress and our anxieties that we're all actually kind of experiencing given COVID. Now, before I actually start the presentation proper, I would like to share that I'm not just a practitioner of mental health, but I am a patient because I have personally personally experienced depression and anxiety for a few years. And after finding all the possible ways I could help myself, what really helped me was realizing that I needed to attend to the root cause of emotions. It's much like using a piece of tissue paper for a cold, and it attends to the symptoms. So it doesn't really get to how I could better overcome the cold, which is to fortify my immunity. So today, my goal is to actually share what those underlying causes are and how you can fortify your emotional strength. Now, what's going to be very interesting for some of you is that a study was shown that women, particularly who are experiencing this global pandemic of COVID, are going through an immense amount of depression compared to men. 83% versus 36%. Now, that's huge. How many of you can relate to that? Raise your hands in the chat bar. Say yes if you agree. By the way, you know, it'll be so good as a community if we can all just share experiences, because it actually helps us feel that we're going through a collective thing that we can get through together, especially as women. So feel free to participate. Now, 83% is huge. And the second statistic that came out from the study was that there's a 53% of increase in anxiety for working women versus 29% for men. Now, that again is almost double. And if you were to think about it, it's not surprising because of the many, many roles that we have to play. As women, we are mothers, wives, we are also children and often caretakers of our parents. Now, the interesting thing is that COVID has collectively caused more stress than 9/11 and the Great Depression. Think about that for a second. Isn't it surprising for some of us? Or maybe not so. Personally, I was surprised because can you imagine the strains at the Great Recession, for example, for those of us who aren't in America, it would have put the strains on our homes, our finances, and yet COVID has collectively made us feel more stressed than ever. Now, I just want to make a note about the statistics I shared about us women suffering a bit more than men. I just have to say that men still do have higher suicide rates than women. And the only reason I highlight that is so that some of us don't, go to our spouse and say, haha, I'm experiencing a bit more than you are. Men may have underreported it. They may not deal with it as much and they deny it. But I don't want to take away the fact that we do collectively anyway experience a lot more stress. Now, moving on to what we're going to talk about today, I want to bring you on a journey with me that uncovers in the first part of my talk the science of emotions, and more importantly, why we can't control them and how we get hijacked. And in understanding that, I feel that we're going to be better able to attend to the solutions that we can bring for ourselves. After we do that, I'm actually going to bring you through the stages of grief that we're all collectively experiencing. And more importantly, how fear, anger, and sadness are part of those stages, and how we can move towards the light at the end of that grieving tunnel, which is of acceptance, by improving our sense of control that we have over these events that COVID has brought to our lives. And the final part of the journey is where I share some strategies for how you can better manage these stresses and anxieties that are brought to us, not just by our own minds and emotions, but by other people. We're going to talk about boundaries, how you can assert yourself. And if all else fails, there's going to be a 2-minute exercise that I hope, if nothing else works for you, that I almost can guarantee it will. So without further ado, let's go on to the first part of the talk, which is the science of emotions. Now, you're seeing 6 pictures here, and what they actually show are 6 of 7 universal emotions that Dr. Paul Ekman, he's the father, I would say, of emotions and how they are expressed in ourselves. He actually found that human beings all over the world, we actually feel the exact same 7 emotions, exactly the same. And we express them the same way as anyone would in any other part of the world. And this happens even as children. Now, before I actually go on to show you what those 7 emotions are, I think it's very important for me to establish that emotions have been developed in our bodies as a solution coping mechanism. Think about that for a second. A solution. It's something that our bodies are going to activate in us so that we can activate this action that we can take in terms of emergencies without conscious awareness. So it's actually not a problem, because I think many of us conceive of emotions as an abstract thing, that it's fluff. We don't actually realize that it is as natural a response as sweating when it's hot, for example. And I'm going to go into that. So what I want you to keep in mind as I bring you through this first part is to think of emotions as not good or bad, but rather as constructive or destructive, depending on how it's used. So the first of the 7 emotions that were discovered to be universal is happiness. And I think we can all agree that's one of the emotions we love. It's the most constructive. The second one is sadness. Again, something we're all too familiar with, especially for those of us who have children. Babies, they cry from birth and for a few years up until then. Now, the third emotion is disgust. We all know people who don't like durians or offensive smells, and that's a very natural response. And the fourth one is fear. Again, something that we're all too familiar with, one of the root causes of anxiety. Now, the fifth one is anger. And this is one of the emotions that I would say is arguably the most destructive emotion, but we're going to see why it's still inbuilt in us as human beings. The sixth one is surprise. It is a universal emotion. And the last one is contempt, where some of us feel like we're better than others, or others feel that they're better than us. Now, for the purposes of the workshop today, and because of the time that we have, we're going to focus on the 3 most not so useful ones for our emotional health. That's sadness, fear, and anger. And before I get into that, I also want to highlight something that's a bit interesting, and that is that people who have been blind since birth experience and express emotions in the exact same way as people who have been born with sight. Now, if you look at this picture here, there are two athletes. One is blind, one is not, and they have just lost a match. And if you look at the expressions, it's identical. They're both experiencing sadness in the exact same way. And if you look at the next picture, these two athletes, again, one is blind and one is sighted, they both won a medal. And you might be surprised to see that they still look sad, but that's actually more of a sad elation, this disbelief almost that they've overcome something they didn't think they could. Now, the purpose I'm showing you this is to actually lessen your skepticism as to why some emotions are inbuilt into us and some are not. But more importantly, sadness is part of our physiology when we need either help or if we need to be left alone. And that's something I'm going to go into a bit more. But before that, let's go into the real purpose of emotions and why are they built into our bodies. Now, the first one, anger. Now, you might think, well, there's no real reason anger should exist in us. But if you think about it, without anger, we can't achieve our goals. Now, there's a universal trigger that makes every human being angry. And that's actually when something or someone interferes or stops us from reaching a goal that we really want to get. Think about the fact that if we had no anger response, we would never achieve or be able to overcome challenges that people are trying to stop us from achieving. A very good example of this of anger in a constructive use is for social movements, women's rights movements. If there was no anger, there wouldn't be enough of an effort made to overcome women's rights, or even the recent one about how Black Lives Matter. So the next time you get angry, instead of wishing you didn't feel that, just remember that you are experiencing a natural response to something that's blocked a goal that you wish to have. And more importantly, the function of that is for you to stop the interference and to eliminate that goal, which is why when you feel angry, your heart starts beating, it's preparing you to fight. And again, we'll get into that. But before then, let's go and look at fear. Fear, again, is something that's built into us because it helps us protect ourselves from being harmed. Now, the universal trigger for fear is when something threatens us, like literally our survival, or in primitive times, it would be poisonous or dangerous animals. And as we've evolved into social creatures, fears can be triggered by things that threaten our reputation, for example, because it links to our jobs, how we're perceived, and ultimately to our rice bowl. So the next time you feel fear, and especially in the context of the pandemic, remember that that's because COVID is literally threatening our ways of life and the futures that we've prepared for ourselves. Now, the function of fear, as I said, and I'll just reiterate it, is for us to react or respond in a way that avoids the harm that this possibly dangerous thing is going to do to us. So it activates either the fight or flight response. Now, the next emotion that we're going to talk about is sadness. Now, sadness is something that I'm sure many of us have gone through in different degrees. And the universal trigger for that is when we lose something that's really important to us. It has to be, it can't be just a person, it can be an object, basically anything that we value, even the loss of time. Now, the function of sadness, now some people might say, well, it doesn't really serve a purpose, but it actually helps other people when they see sadness in your face do one of two things. It helps them come together to support you in times of grief, when we've lost someone to death, for example. Or another part of it is when we need to send a social signal to others that we're not quite ready to mingle and we need time to recuperate and regenerate. And very often people who see signs of sadness tend to leave us alone. There are good and bad aspects to this, of course, because if you leave them alone for too long, someone actually does develop a sense of depression. And again, we'll get into that. But basically what I hope I've managed to show you is how each of these three emotions actually have an evolutionary function and purpose for us. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Sue, you've told me about these emotions. So what? We still haven't gotten to how this means I'm anxious or fearful. And in order to get to that, I first think it's important to break into pieces how these emotions lead to anxiety, for example, or stress. Now, an emotion technically lasts at the most 5 to 6 seconds. And it's usually sadness that lasts the longest. Anger, 2 to 3 seconds. Surprise is the shortest, 1 second. So it's very different to experience a physical emotion versus a prolonged feeling of despair or stress and worry. And that's because an emotion is tied to a memory of how we interpret an event that's happened to us. And if we keep rethinking that, it becomes a mood. You know how sometimes you just have days where you're just so angry or irritable? But often enough, if you do replay that sense of that mood where, you know, you just hate your job or you don't like where things are going in your life, it becomes a personality trait. And just as an example, let's look at anger. Anger is, if replayed often enough, and I think we've all experienced this at some point, makes us very irritable. If we have a colleague, a friend, or a child that keeps up doing something that we really don't enjoy, we're going to get irritated. But if that person keeps repeating that behavior and triggering us, we start becoming very hostile. And we see that in certain relationships that are not healthy. And eventually, if that becomes a prolonged repetition of hostility, that person actually becomes violent. And in some cases, we see husbands, for example, who become very abusive. Now, in terms of fear, having enough of a fear repeated makes one very apprehensive. So if you look at the box there, for example, I have a fear of lizards. And every time I see a lizard, I immediately tense up. And it's interesting because for some people, they may not have that fear response. But in a social setting, for example, it also makes someone very, I guess people would describe them as introverts. And that's when we develop traits of being shy or even just being timid in general. Do that often enough again, of feeling this sense of being scared, and we actually start developing a sense of anxiety. And that's where phobias come about, social phobias, work anxiety. It all stems from a fear that we have that we keep replaying and not changing how we feel about it. And again, we're going to go into how we can work on that. The last point is actually sadness. If you keep replaying or experiencing events in your life that make you sad, we are going to feel quite blue, and we all go through that. However, if it's prolonged enough, you actually become a person who becomes quite melancholic and pessimistic. And I've experienced that, you know, when I've experienced a great loss in my own life. The problem is when it happens for a prolonged period, and clinically, I would say if it extends for more than 2 weeks, that's when it's a real problem. And it becomes a depression. It's very hard for us to get out of that because we're used to a new way of being. Now, before, again, we get to how we can attend it, I think it's very important for us to understand what the process of emotions are. How many of you right now are looking at me thinking, yes, okay, Sue, I know all of this. I just want to know how to control it. So the question is, how many of you think you can control your emotions? Can you stop feeling sad or angry? Do you think there's a magic strategy for you to not feel that immediate response? Have a look at this GIF. Now, I think, and I hope most of us can see that her reaction, which was fear, surprise, happened in under a second. And if I had to break down the exact process for you, the timeline of it, from the time something frightening or stressful happens to us to the time we respond to it, a total of 400 milliseconds has elapsed. Now, if you think you have a chance of doing anything in that 400 seconds so that you don't respond that way, I'm going to tell you, I'm sorry, it's going to be really hard. Because if you see again this GIF, her response of fear has moved her away from something that could potentially kill her with one bite. So it served as a survival mechanism. So I would actually encourage you to think of what you can do right after that. As soon as we experience an inbuilt emotion, which remember is a survival mechanism, we can then have the time after that to decide how we wished we could respond instead of react. Now, of course, we wouldn't want to change our response to poisonous or threatening issues, but we really want to think about things that have affected us in terms of the COVID pandemic, the sense of fear that we may not have lives that we thought we were going to build. Now, the next thing that we need to think about before we get to that is, how do we develop a response if we feel so overcome and gripped by that fear? You know, as you saw with that snake. Again, to understand that, you have to kind of come to terms with how our brains work. And I don't want to get too technical because I know, you know, there's so much science to it. But I feel that once you see a visual image of how our emotions are processed and how it hijacks the part of our mind that wishes we could make a better response, you're going to be able to imbue the strategy in a much better way that actually works for you. So right here we have an image of the brain. And what I want you to focus on is the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is the part of our brain that stores and processes emotions. It keeps emotional memories of how we felt about certain things. And it's part of our limbic system, a very primitive part of our brain. And if you look right at the top of our heads right here, and in the image there, you can see that this prefrontal cortex is where we think rationally, where we make decisions. Now, in a normal situation, for example, if we want to, or if there's a meeting that we have to do with someone that it's not really important, it may trigger emotion of, let's say you don't like that person, you're going to feel a little bit disgusted. Oh, I don't really like him or her. So that's an emotional response, but it's not enough of a threat for it to hijack and give you a sense of fear and anxiety. So what happens is the emotion gets passed to the frontal lobe, where you're going to think about the pros and cons of, should I meet him? Should I meet her? Do I want to waste my time? What can I gain out of that? And then you make a decision. Now, the issue happens when the amygdala hijack comes into play, which is a term that was first, I think, popularized by Daniel Goleman of the book Emotional Intelligence. And all it means is that there's a part of your brain, the amygdala, that chooses to stop a rational response at a time when it perceives that something is really going to threaten your sense of surviving. And in this social world, as I mentioned earlier, it could be anything that we have developed a real fear of, because it leads to an outcome such as loss of income, or even something we can't control, like people that we love getting sick. Now, if you're looking at this and thinking, okay, Sue, you've taught me these parts of the brain, I'm feeling something, it hijacks me, what can I do? Now, this is the best news. You can do something about it by reverse engineering the system of how our brain works. Now, the first thing I would highly recommend you to do is to give yourself 30 minutes to calm yourself down. Now, what happens, and I'm going to explain why 30 minutes. When your amygdala decides to hijack you and it creates a stress response, it releases these stress hormones, you know, cortisol and adrenaline, so that it can prepare you to fight or to flee. And it's going to course through your body, right? And it does a number of physical things to you. It constricts your pupils in some cases. It dilates them, I'm sorry, so that you can take in more information. But your heart starts pumping faster. It starts sending blood to parts of your body so that you can run or you can fight. And it shuts down non-essential processes. Now, from the time that these chemicals are released in your body, from the time you perceive a threat, it becomes elevated. These stress hormones elevate after 15 minutes. So if you think you have a chance of trying to make a rational decision in a 15-minute block from the time you are stressed or fearful of something, you have a very low chance of making a very good rational response. The other part that I think we may not be too happy to hear is that these stress hormones remain in our body for up to 15 hours, actually, but the least of it is for up to an hour. Now, we have to be very mindful of the fact, I'm sure, that we are often in situations we can't take time out from, you know, at least not for an hour or 15 hours. But I would highly recommend, if you can, leaving the situation or the place that's triggered you and set a timer for a minimum of 30 minutes. And you will have a better chance then of actually being able to do the next few steps that we're going to explore. Now, if you can't take this 30 minutes, another thing you could do, which I would recommend you do anyway, is to take a deep breath. Literally take a deep breath. And the reason, and take a few if you can, the reason this is going to work is because remember how I said your heart starts beating really quickly to prepare you to fight or to flee? When you breathe deeply, it forces you to relax, and it sends these reverse signals to your brain that, hang on, if I'm breathing deeply, I don't think there's actually anything that's really that life-threatening. So you're trying to force your body to get to a state that can help your brain calm down a bit better. And the third thing, which is what I'm more excited about, is to consciously activate your frontal cortex. Remember how we talked about it just now? The rational part of your brain, to start working to overcome that hijack of the middle part of the brain, to try and regain a sense of control. How do you do that? As you can see in this GIF right here, this woman is saying, I feel like I can't control my emotions. That's exactly it. And you might be thinking, what? Well, this is why. Recent studies have actually found that putting feelings, how you feel, into words produces therapeutic effects in your brain. It actually lessens the intensity of sadness, of anger, and it actually lessens the way you feel if you're in pain. The good news is that doing this can reduce the amygdala hijack by up to 40%. That is huge. If you think about it, why wouldn't you want to try that? Now, how do you actually go about doing this? Very simply. This is a feelings wheel. And a feelings wheel, all it is are many, many words that describe different variants of emotion that we feel in a day or in any day. Now, if you look at this, let's look at anger, for example. When you're feeling angry with someone who, for example, didn't do something you wish they could, if you look at the outer circle of anger, you're going to realize that one of those emotions apply to you a bit more. You might be feeling frustrated. And if you dig a bit deeper into that outermost cycle, if you see that frustration breaks into two feelings, and that's you're feeling infuriated or annoyed. And how you would apply this use of vocabulary to the strategy of naming what you feel is actually by saying, I am so annoyed. I am so infuriated and frustrated with this person. He's making me feel so angry, and I wish I could do something about that. And I can't, because I can't control how I feel. Now, just by doing that, you're forcing your brain, which has been hijacked previously, to come up with words to describe this emotion, and it's sending that feedback back. And it's going to send you a subconscious signal that you're actually taking some measure of control into this emotional hijack. And I actually do this all the time. It actually helps to have an audience witness or to hear what you're saying. But again, I know we don't have that luxury. So what I actually do is I often record myself ranting or speaking about what I want to my phone. I video record that and I play it back so that I feel like I've heard myself. Now, of course, if you have good friends, family that you can talk to, I would highly encourage you to actually do that with them. Now, for those of you thinking, well, can I just write it down? You could. It may not have as great of an impact as saying it out loud, but if you're not comfortable with saying that, there's a second tool that you can use. And that is something I call free noting or a brain dump. Now, this is an exercise I've done with so many people, and I'm going to share that with you shortly. But what it essentially encompasses is just taking a sheet of paper, and you actually only need 5 minutes to do this. If you can find 5 minutes in a day to do this, I encourage it, and a pen or pencil, and you start writing everything that's in your mind. Every single thing. It doesn't have to be how you feel. It could be lists or things you have to complete today, errands, chores, anything. There are no rules to that. There's only one rule, and that is for the duration of time that I'm going to set you today, which is 2 minutes, your pen cannot be lifted from this piece of paper. You have to keep writing and writing and writing until I say time's up. And if you find yourself saying, well, I don't know what to write, write that down. Say, I don't know what to write. This exercise is stupid. Why am I doing this? So let's have fun. Give this a go. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set a timer. Get your papers out in front of you. If you don't have paper, use your phone. You can type that out. And when you're ready, we're going to start. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do that today. So 1, 2, 3. You can start writing. If you have any questions, by the way, and you're not sure, feel free to type them out in the chat box, and I'll be happy to reply. Maybe you can even say, God, I wonder what else I'm going to have to do. Oh my God, you know, I have so many things on my mind. When are we going to get to the other parts of this presentation? Or can Sue just shut up already and let me write in peace? You have 1 minute left. Keep writing. Remember, your pen cannot be lifted from the paper. If you're typing, type like a mad person. And you have 30 seconds left. Ten seconds left. And time's up. I love my singing bowl. Now, how is that for some of you? All of you, anyone who tried it? I really want you to ask yourself how you're feeling after that. Feel free to share in the group. Remember, what you share can help someone and feel like, oh wow, they had a similar experience. Now, we usually do this for 5 minutes, which is what I would recommend. But even if all you can afford is 2 minutes, it's okay. You will actually find, if you do this again for 5 minutes, that there's going to be a sense of emptiness. That's why this is called a brain dump. And someone just shared that it's not easy to write down all their feelings because there's a lack of words to describe it, and that's okay. Remember, it takes time to develop a fluency of emotional vocabulary. Feel free in your own time to Google the feelings wheel. And if you can't, it's always okay to not have to describe a feeling, but to just say, I am angry, I want to kick something, I want to do something. I just, you know, I feel so useless, I feel helpless, when can I ever feel better? So try this again. And the feedback that we've gotten from so many hundreds, literally hundreds of our participants that we've done this with before, is that if they do this the first thing in the morning, when they have their worries, their fears, their anxieties, they feel so much lighter that they feel better able to go about the rest of their day without feeling hijacked by worries that they haven't verbalized or written on paper. Now, if you combine that, oh, I just want to say, I want to thank Valerie for saying it's a way of processing her feelings. And that's absolutely right. This is part of a process. It helps your brain process what you're feeling. And and the word we often hear is that it's very cathartic. This is one of the easiest but most valuable exercises I cannot recommend highly enough. And also, if you have an expectation that you're going to feel positive or negative, it might change experience, but again, that's okay. For some people saying, oh my God, why am I attending to stuff that makes me feel worse? Don't worry. The more you go through it, the better you'll actually feel. So I just want to highlight that whenever we do exercises in emotions, there is a bit of a fear that people think that if I'm going to focus on what I feel badly about, I'm going to get more depressed or angry or negative. And that is true if you only focus on that without the process that follows it. And the process that actually has to follow is something that you do for longer than just 30 seconds or a minute. And which is why I say, if you can, 5 minutes is the ideal amount of time. When you start writing about how you feel, combined with what you want to do about it, which is what we're going to get on to in the middle part and also at the end of this, when you put it all together, it's going to be a very positive, uplifting experience. One that you're going to find helpful. If you don't find it positive, that's okay, but it will be more helpful than just getting stuck in something that makes you feel angry. Now, what I'm going to talk about next before I go on to the next section is how you can combine this process of a brain dump with naming your feelings. And that's something that some of you may already do. And that is actually journaling. Now, for those of you who haven't journaled, there is this amazing statistic that research has shown that actually found that people who were laid off from their jobs, right? And I'm going to put it out there, professionals, when they journaled about their feelings for 5 days, they actually found jobs at a much higher rate. 68% of them found new jobs versus 27% of those who didn't journal. And that's because, as I hope I've managed to convince you, there is a science to the way writing your feelings expressing them helps the rational part of your brain take control. And in so doing, it gives you this other sense of control, which I'm going to talk about. And you start engaging in actions and behaviors that are going to move you out of that space of feeling trapped into one that you feel that you can have more mobility and agency over. So we've just talked about the science of emotions in this section, how it's universal, and more importantly, that they serve a purpose. I want to highlight that having an emotional response is like sweating. If you think you should not sweat when it's hot, it's almost it's a losing battle. I think what the purpose of emotions is to alert us to something, and then we can choose what we want to do about it. So if I feel hot, for example, I can choose to turn on the air conditioner or move into a cooler place. And that's the analogy I'm going to use for choosing a response that you want to an emotion that you have experienced. Now, the second thing we just talked about is how emotions follow a process and how you can't control them, especially because of the amygdala hijack. But how you can manage them is what we just did, which is the free noting process and using a wider vocabulary of words. And if English isn't your first language or something you're comfortable with, please feel free to use your own language and or whatever else you feel that works better. If you think that drawing an emotion helps you, do that too. Sometimes the creative process engages that part of your brain as well. Now, moving on to the second section of our talk, and that is grief and locus of control. I want to really get us to understand how we're exactly grieving in this pandemic. Now, I think many of us understand what grief is, but it's very important to actually break it down into its parts so that if I can help you identify which stage you're at, you're going to be able to better get to the goal of the grieving process and the light at the end of that tunnel, which is acceptance. Now, given that compared to losing someone, for example, this pandemic has not given us closure. It's something that keeps going. It gives us a sense of uncertainty, which is probably why it's very hard for us to reach that last stage, which I'll go into. And so the second part of this talk is going to guide you through an exercise of how you can develop a better sense of control so that you can reach that goal of acceptance eventually and much faster than we otherwise would. Now, grief, very simply, is something that we all experience and we have at some point. But in terms of the COVID pandemic, we are experiencing the loss of freedoms. freedoms of where we want to go, where we want to travel, our choices. A lot of our choices have been sublimated almost by the conditions that COVID has imposed on us. And we're also experiencing role loss. And this is something that many people may not be aware of. If we were out about life the normal way we were, being a colleague, for example, or this identity we had with being a boss or a CEO, and we can't exercise that in the way we used to, we are going to feel the sense of sadness over the loss of the role that we once identified with and gave us so much meaning. Now, Kubler-Ross is this amazing psychiatrist who worked with terminally ill patients and found out there are about 5 stages of grief. Now, it's very important to not think of these stages of grief that we go through as a linear 1, 2, 3, but more like a cycle. We can actually go back and forth. But what I'm going to do is show you the 5 stages very quickly, and more importantly, how it may feel for you in terms of this COVID pandemic. And I want you to keep thinking about where you would position yourself in this. Now, if you look at this slide, we all start with denial. I think a lot of us have passed that stage already. And we're like, okay, COVID has happened. So I'm going to give you an example. When COVID first happened, we'll probably be like, you know what, it's just the flu, it's no big deal. But then a lot of us got into the anger stage, which was, how do we gain control over this stupid thing? And a lot of us be like, I don't want to wear a mask. I want to travel. I want to eat out where I want to. But when we can't control that because of the government impositions, we move on to a state of bargaining. It's a way for us to feel like we have some control. And that's when we start saying, maybe I'll just go out with 5 friends or call them over and no one has to know, even though there's a risk of catching something that could kill us. And when we realize that nothing we're doing is really going to help us cope with these impositions, we fall into a state of despair. And we feel that, you know what, there's really nothing I can do. Now, the part that we want to get to in this is acceptance. Now, before we get there, I would like to ask you to quickly look at these 5 stages and ask yourself which stage you are at this week, this month. You could also be shifting between anger and bargaining, or bargaining in despair, and back to that again. It could be a vicious cycle. Now, the reason I would like you to acknowledge that, and someone said acceptance, which is great, and that's the goal for us. And for those of us who are still struggling, I know I still struggle with certain aspects, please know that acknowledging which stage you're at is again part of the process of regaining a sense of control. It's like trying to exorcise a ghost. I always tell that to my clients. You cannot get rid of something you can't see. And if you cloak something and give form and shape to it, you're better able to address it. So we want to reach a stage of acceptance where we feel, okay, you know what, I can't change what the government does, how I want to, whether I want to wear a mask, but what I can do is, while I'm home, how I want to feel about the situation and how I want to change the meaning it has for me. However, some people find that a struggle because in terms of a sense of control, in psychology, there's this term called locus of control where they found that there are people on a spectrum who either feel they have a great sense of control because of their actions, their habits, their behaviors, versus people who feel that they don't because life happens to them. Now, the good news is that if you identify with someone who feels that life happens, you don't have much control, you can actually work on moving back towards an internal one by changing the narrative. And we're going to do a very quick exercise. Now, just have a quick look at this graphic and see which do you think is your kind of thinking. Do you feel like you make things happen in your life or that things happen to you? Now, if so, don't worry, there's no negative or positive to that. Just know that sometimes having an external sense of control is great for teamwork, team building. You're happy to relegate control to someone else without having the need to manage that. But in terms of a pandemic, I would strongly urge us to develop an internal locus of control. And so what we're going to do now is a very quick 2-minute exercise. And I'm going to ask you to look at a few columns and identify something that you want to work on right now. It may be a situation that gives you fear and anxiety. And then I'm going to ask you to look at how you think you can manage it, what you can do to bring you that outcome. And most importantly, I need you to think about what you can or can't control about the actions you want to take. Now, if you look at this slide, or before I go into that, I just want to highlight that in our lives, we are the center of our worlds. This is what we can control, everything that happens to us. There is another circle out of us called the sphere of influence. People we can kind of influence. For example, we can make our children or parents wear masks or sanitize more often. But the last sphere is what we ultimately can't control, which is we can't actually control if our parents or our kids or our husbands decide to continue wearing masks once they're not in our vision or line of sight. So the only thing we can control essentially is how we choose to respond. And that is what this next exercise is going to be about. Now, have a look at this table. I'll give you about 1 to 2 minutes. I want you to think of something, and as an example I'll walk you through right now, is let's say you want to create more balance in your home and working life, and we're going to address that soon. So what you can do is to ask your boss if you can have an arrangement, work maybe after 6, stop working by 6. But then if you think about it, what can you control? You can actually control how you're going to ask your boss. If you can work less or more flexibly, you can start working earlier, you can shut off your phone after a certain time. But what you can't control is ultimately if your boss says yes or no to you, how other people might think of how you want to manage your new work schedule, or if you start worrying about not being able to check your email. That's going to be harder to control. So I'm just going to give you a minute now. Think about this. Really think about this. And if you can't, it's okay. Just read the second or third row, and that might give you an idea. And I would highly encourage you, when you receive this video, to pause on this and do this exercise in your own time. So my goal here is to introduce you to this very simple table that I really, really encourage you to work on before you sleep at night. And what you're essentially doing is developing a practice and a new habit of finding alternative ways that you can control something, but while also acknowledging the limits of what you can't. And ironically, releasing that sense of need to control is going to give you a better sense of it. Now, how does that make you feel, having done this? Has it made you realize what you actually can or can't control? Again, feel free to ask questions about it later on. Now, type how you feel in the chat box. But again, in the interest of time, let's get to the last part of my talk. And so this is what we've just managed. Before I go into that, again, we've just talked about grief, the 5 stages of it, and how we can have locus of control. But now let's talk about other people. You might be thinking, say, okay, Sue, you've taught me everything, but this is so unfair. I live in a household, I'm working from home, I have kids, I have pets, I have a husband. I can't control how they act, but it still impacts me. And this is where we're going to get into what I hope some of you may find useful, which is that of creating boundaries. We're going to see how we can use some strategies to create boundaries that assert ourselves. Now, the first thing before we even get into this section, which I hope you find useful, is to not have guilt. In my experience with the clients I have and with women, a lot of them feel so bad that they have to say no. And it's, apart from being part of our social makeup of how we've been socialized to be as women, I think saying no to people we love is sometimes harder even than people we don't know very well, like colleagues. I just need to stress here that taking care of yourself, saying yes to yourself, is going to end up helping your relationship with your husband or kids in the long run. Because trust me when I say, if you say, you know what, I can deal with this, I can deal with this, 5 days later, you've got resentment that's built up. And when he says, is everything okay? You go, I'm fine. And you have a fight. So no, I would highly recommend working on not having a sense of guilt is key. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard for you to follow the rest of the strategies, because when you say something with guilt, people pick up on that, you know, and they kind of take advantage of that. So yes, firstly, saying yes to yourself is going to help, I promise you, improve your relationships with others. They just have to get used to it. Now, the first thing you have to do, we're going to talk about, is how you can create nonverbal boundaries, very psychological boundaries. The second thing is I'm going to go into is how you can assertively communicate your needs using a very simple 4-step example, which is not going to position you as being aggressive, because I think we don't want to be aggressive. Finally, I'm going to share with you a tool, a very beautiful exercise that we can do if all else fails. Because let's face it, we can't change people. Now, how do we create psychological boundaries? Now, the first thing I'm going to say is, if you're working from home, get dressed for it. Look the part. I am talking to you from my home, but I'm dressed fully as if I'm delivering a presentation in the flesh, because it sends a signal, 2 signals. One, for example, imagine if I was in my t-shirt, I don't think you'd take me very seriously. For the same reason, the people in your environment are going to realize, oh, wow, she's actually working, she means business. And more importantly, psychologically, it puts you in that frame of mind of telling yourself that, look, I am dressed, I need to get work done, and I'm going to be in a different space. I'm actually wearing perfume and you can't smell it, no one else can, but putting on the perfume I normally would to work also sets me in that mode that I've gotten so used to. Now, the second thing you can do is to establish your workspace or your desk in the way you would as if it was in the office. If you have pictures of your family and friends and quotes, replicate that. You want to be able to step in a space, and in psychology, there's this whole section of this called environmental psychology. It does influence the way you feel about your work, but more importantly, anyone else in your space looks at that desk and goes, that's her area. And that kind of creates a space of work area versus home area. The third thing, it's so important, is if you're at work and you often go out to take a lunch break, do that if you're working from home. Go downstairs, go out of your house, open the door. If you don't want to eat outside, bring a coffee or drink there, remove your mask, drink it, and go back home. You need to replicate the schedule of what it means to have a distinction between a working life, even if it's from the home. Now, the next part, and I hope many of you have done this, is to set our office hours and to clock out. It is so important to actually tell yourself that after a certain time, you're not going to do or work, you're not going to respond to emails, and find a way of asserting yourself with that. And we're going to talk about that right after this. And, maintain a schedule. Have a roster. If you have a partner that doesn't do much of the work that you feel burdened by, set a roster and say, well, can you do this on this day at this time? And once it's out there, pin it somewhere where it's visible so that you can remind them that, it's not your turn today. Also, very important, if there are things that continually distract you or trigger you, make a list of them and let someone know that, hey, this kind of bothers me at work. Do you think you can do it in a different space, a different area, different time? List it out. And finally, create a winding down trigger or ritual. If you used to work in the office and you'd come home and a trigger for you winding down would be to turn on Netflix, for example, do that as well. Try to replicate the environment that you used to experience when you were not working from home. Now, the next thing we're going to do is into how you can assertively communicate your needs verbally. Now, it's a framework I just call ASSA, A-S-S-A. Now, the first thing is to alert and to ask. Ask someone if you can talk to them about something that you feel strongly about, but ask it respectfully. Don't blame or have the sense of resentment. Just say, hi, can I talk to you about this thing? And it brings me to my next point. It's about stating your grievance. That's the S. Use the word I in a low voice. Research has shown that when you speak in a low, slow voice, people tend to take you more seriously. So say, I feel a bit stressed and overwhelmed when I have to do the cooking and cleaning. And, I really hope we can discuss this to find a solution. And that brings me to my third point. Telling them why this solution is going to benefit the both of you is going to increase the probability of your assertive ask. Say, if you help me with this, I'm going to be in a better mood. We're going to have more time. And I really want to be able for us to live happily without the stresses that working from home has brought. And finally, the last A is to agree. Agree on how you could both help each other towards a mutual solution. And then make an agreement. So you could say something like, let's agree. Don't say can we, because if you ask, they can say no. So let's agree to do this. Can can I put this out somewhere? Or, you know, can we work on this and promise we'll work really hard at this? And the reason you want to do that is because if there is a time where you notice they're not keeping to their part of the agreement, you can remind them, say, hey, you know what, we kind of agreed on this, can we try? And if all else fails, if this person is not willing, ask them for a solution. Say, what do you think you can do that's comfortable for you, but also for me, so that we can reach this compromise better? So that is how I would actually couch a very useful model of assertion. And remember, do not feel bad about this. They will come around to it. They just have to get used to the fact that you're suddenly setting boundaries. Now, the last part of my talk today is going to move into what you can do if all of this doesn't work for you. And that is a concept within mindfulness. And a very quick introduction to it is simply that mindfulness is the awareness that comes from paying attention in your present moment without judgment and with compassion to yourself. And the picture you see there is John Kabat-Zinn, the modern founding father of mindfulness. Now, this is a practice you can do for yourself if you feel like everything around you is just not working out. And if this is the only thing you do for the rest of the week and you don't feel like doing any of the other strategies, then this is what we would be, I would call the icing on the cake, and that's belly breathing. Breathing reverse engineers the hacks that stress and anxiety puts onto us. It tricks your brain cells into thinking that you are calm. And these researchers actually did a test and found that there are 175 brain cells that spy on your breathing to see how you're feeling. So we're going to go right into this, and I'm going to first explain how the breathing is to be done, and we're going to do an exercise. So what we're going to do is inhale through our nostrils, hold that breath for a while, and exhale through our mouth. But our mouth has to be put in an O to slow the flow of our out breath so that we don't do it too fast. I'm going to count you through it so you don't have to worry. But the idea is to inhale through your nostrils, keep that breath for a while, exhale through your mouth for a longer count than your nostril breath. But this is what you have to do. You have to breathe through your belly. So I would encourage you to put one hand on your chest, one on your belly. And as you inhale, you want this part to expand, not your chest, but your belly. So if you're sitting down or standing up, it doesn't matter. You can open or close your eyes. I would encourage you closing your eyes. And we're going to go through that right now. And just remember, if you have any thoughts, it's okay. I'll guide you through it. So wherever you are, sitting or standing, close your eyes. Now take a deep breath in through your nostrils. 2, 3, 4. Hold your breath. 6, 7, 8. Exhale through your mouth slowly. 9, 10, 11, 12. Now it's okay if you couldn't follow my count. Do it at a pace that's comfortable for you. And let's do that again. Remember, belly breathe in through your nose. 3, 4. Hold the breath. 6, 7, 8. And exhale. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Now breathe in through your nose. 3, 4. Hold. 5, 6, 7. Exhale. 8, 9, 10, 11. Repeat this at your own time. Keep doing this. If you're having any thoughts in your mind, any distractions, it's okay. Keep breathing. See those thoughts floating through to the top, just like clouds in the sky. And see them passing you by. It's okay if you can't keep count. It's just an exercise. You're giving yourself a fair shot, a chance. And just keep breathing. And we have 10 seconds left, so this will be our last. In through the nose. Hold it. And exhale. Slowly. Now, how do you feel? I hope most of you feel the way most of my participants do, and that's really relaxing. Great, someone said great, thank you. Now, would it surprise you to know that that just took 2 minutes? I encourage you to find 2 minutes in your day. It could even be locking yourself in the bathroom cubicle if you're sitting, and that's all you have, and just doing this belly breath. And if you can do it to up to 4 times a day, that would be great. But if all you can afford is 2 minutes, please do that every day for the next 7 days. And I promise you, you will see a huge difference in the way your brain processes and manages hijacking emotions. If you wear an Apple Watch and it monitors your heart rate, we've had many participants who've shown us within the second day of our workshops, they're like, oh my God, it actually said my blood pressure has been helped. And that's because they did it 4 to 5 times a day. If there's only one thing you want to do and take away from this talk today, I would say do this belly breathing, increase it to 5 minutes. And I promise you, you are going to feel a difference in your reactivity, and you're going to give yourself that space to respond so much better. And it will help you sleep better before bedtime. There are many different breathing strategies out there you can Google, but just to begin with, I would recommend this. There are always 1 or 2 people in our workshops who don't feel that sense of relaxation, and that's okay. Some of them feel more anxious. So what's interesting is I found that for some people who get that response, I would recommend you do a running breathing, which is quite the opposite. It's people who do exercise, or if you're on the treadmill or any exercise, to actually just use that as a form of attention awareness breathing. When you pay attention to your breath, it sends a signal that you are in control of your life, because that is the one thing we have absolute control over, and that's our breath. And the breath is the bridge to the present moment. So I hope that you found very useful. And as a wrap up, I just want to say what we just covered was how we can create psychological boundaries, verbal boundaries by the ASSA model, and belly breathing. And as a whole wrap up, today I talked about the signs of emotions, why you can't control them, how we're going through grief, and how we can get to acceptance by increasing our locus of control using that exercise. And finally, how you can manage your stress using all these tools that we just shared. I hope that was useful. And now I would like to take some questions if any of you have them before we end. Thank you for listening. And Sabrina,
Yes, it was so good, the breathing exercise.
oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed
I feel
it.
so relaxed.
Great.
Thank you so much.
2 minutes. Pleasure.
Any questions, everybody?
Yes.
It's your chance.
Yes. If you need any, yeah.
I actually have a question. So, Sue,
Sure.
the meditation breathing exercise, obviously we can't take your voice with us when we do it. Is there any applications or any resources out there that can guide us through?
Yes. So the first thing I would do, so what's interesting is that different people have different preferences of how they want to breathe. And so if you do a Google search on the kinds of tools out there, you are actually going to be presented with different options. And I would actually recommend going through all those options to see what suits you. And the reason this is important is because the breathing techniques differ. There are some that ask you to do box breathing, which is 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, or the 4-7-8 breathing for anxiety, which is 4 in, 7 hold, and 8 out. I would actually, there are apps out there. I'm working on an app, by the way, to actually help through guided ones. But in the meantime, I think you can use the Calm app. That is one of the most popular apps. If not, the first few results you get on YouTube, for example, have very good guided meditations. I'm also very happy to actually, in the meantime, record a 2-minute clip and email it to you so that you can share it with anyone who wants it to. But yes, I think there are many resources out there. Try them all out and see which one fits you, because like I said, there are at least 7 to 10 different models of breathing. I would recommend though, I think the goal is for us to be able to do this by ourselves if we don't have resources. Yeah, to access to apps if we're in the middle of a meeting and we just need to calm down. But yes, that's a great question. So the Calm app, CALM, I think that would be the best.
Thank you. And we have some questions coming in actually.
Sure.
Yeah, so we have one from Valerie.
Right.
Oh, actually, okay. So she was saying, as I like to create goals to achieve it, therefore inbuilt a drive and at times anxiety when things don't work out my way, then I get pretty annoyed. How to manage these emotions and expectations?
Right. That's great. So thank you, Valerie, for sharing. So you're going to, of course, get annoyed when you have goals that when it doesn't work your way. And I think expectations, I have to address that word. In Latin, expectations actually mean an awaiting. To expect means to wait for something that you have boxed in a certain way. And it almost always results in disappointment, especially if it's premised on the actions of other people or situations we can't control. So I would actually recommend, as a very quick practice, when you start feeling that annoyance, is remember your heart is beating faster and you're going to be gripped in that thought. The first thing is to take a deep breath and then start saying out loud, I feel so annoyed that, this is not working out the way I want. Do a brain dump if you can, if not rant about it in a video. And then just say how you would like to feel by the end of today, for example. Set a goal and say, I want to be able to feel less annoyed, a little bit more in control. And what can I do to get myself there? And write down a list of alternatives you can actually engage in by changing some of the goals and outcomes you want. And more importantly, I think I used to suffer from goal fixation, which is I need to do exactly this and that. It does help to sometimes change and modify our goals to match where we are emotionally at this point. You don't have to let go of what you want, but also an important thing to note is that goals actually are more easily achievable if you break them down into a form that can lead you to where you want to be, but that you can work on in a minute way. So in terms of that emotional response, I would recommend just doing what we've just done here and to reframe how you can actually feel about it. How do you choose to? And I just want to clarify here, it's not that there's no rule that says you cannot feel annoyed. I think it's about having the choice to say, I choose to remain feeling annoyed, I choose not to feel annoyed, or I choose to make peace with this. I think acknowledging the choice you made about your emotion is going to give you a sense of peace and reduce that, that sense of judgment that we have for ourselves. So I hope that answered Valerie's question.
That's good. And we have another question from Lynn. So what kind of stress control techniques would you recommend for those who are fearful of losing their jobs?
Thank you, Lynn, for sharing that. Again, it's a very good question. I think many people are actually going through this. And one of the things we teach in our mindfulness workshops that addresses this directly is actually an acceptance exercise, which you can do by yourself. Now, this is going to sound a bit crazy and confronting, but I promise you, it actually helps lessen that response. And all you have to do is to close your eyes, take some time out for this, sit in a chair, and start visualizing what is going to happen when and if you lose your job. The reason I say this is you need to bring into mind your biggest fears. And that's because, there's a saying, what you resist persists. So imagine trying to push away a fear that already exists. It's going to give you more stress, and it's like a battle. And so I always say, what you resist persists, but what you accept, you intercept. So instead of not bringing to mind what you fear, bring to mind in full color this scenario of what you fear, and tell yourself, this is something I fear. I fear losing my job. This is how I'm going to feel if it happens, and let it play out. Let it play out for about 2 minutes. Set a timer, because you don't want to get too involved in that, and say, I accept that if this is the case, I will be sad, but I will be able to get through with it, right? And after that, see that image losing color. From becoming a very vivid picture, it starts becoming black and white. And I want you to see that black and white image of you in that scenario where you lose your job, getting further and further away until it gets so small, this black and white speck, and it disappears. Now, once you've accepted what your greatest fear is, in this case, losing your job, the next step is to actually work on sitting down again, closing your eyes, and thinking about how you could go about managing the fallout from that. Think of all the options. What could you do? And if you see yourself crying and sitting down, acknowledge that image too, because it's natural to grieve the loss of your job. And then start bringing to mind how you resolved a similar situation in the past. If you had lost a job before, you had lost something important, think about the fact that you actually managed to get over it to get to where you are today. And whether or not it was done in a healthy or an unhealthy way, it's kind of besides the point. It is, how did you still use strategies without knowing that helped you? Did you talk to friends? Did you seek help from family? What did you turn to? Did you turn to religion? Did you turn to sport? Did you turn to activity? Make a list of the things that helped you the last time you experienced something very similar to a fear of losing, your job. And you will actually realize that you still have it in you. You have all the resources in you. If not, if you feel you don't have the resources, then make a list of what you could access to help you get through the possibility of that. I wish I could say, oh, don't worry, if you think positive, you won't lose your, no. I think in my experience with clients, they have found this practice of accepting the worst case scenario, letting it lose color, and then moving on to what they can do based on experience on the past actually helps them feel like they're going to be prepared if it happens to them. So I really hope that helped your question, Lynn.
So I think that's about it today.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Sue, and thank you everybody so much for joining us today. And again, we have a lot of resources to share with you on our platform. So make sure you sign up on halftheskyAsia.com. It's completely free. And you also receive exclusive event like this one, a lot of different resources as well. And here's the contact details to connect with Sue. So feel free, and if you have any questions. And one more thing is the upcoming events in September, we're going to put up on our event page, and we're going to send out newsletters. So please keep an eye out. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and stay safe and take care.
Thank you so much for having me. I wish everyone a good week ahead.